So this is Daisy the demo cube, and until we paint, and before we paint her, we need to prep this surface. So if we're really good model makers, and this particular cube is not too bad, we're gonna have not very much glue on the edges, and we're not gonna have very much difference in size between these two sides. But we're all human and it can happen. And you have a choice when you make a mistake. You can leave that mistake and feel bad about it. You can leave that mistake and not feel bad about it. Or you could try and fix that mistake. And there are some times where we try and fix it in the moment and sometimes when we try and fix it later. If we have any large edges sticking out, we can take this and just trim that up flush and try and get it to feel on par. So like this one right here, this edge is just a little farther out than it should be. So I'm going to take the knife, come back in, and go ahead and trim right that tiny bit off just to make it flush and as perfect as it can get. Now let's say that it's too small to slice off and the difference isn't very clean. I can use an emery board, which is essentially sandpaper on both sides, to prep that surface. And get it nice and smooth. Now the other thing is that I can use joint compound. So joint compound is water soluble, which means that it reactivates with water. So I have just a bit of it here, and I'm going to put some of it right here on the front of the thing. And it's still nice and soft, but if I were to get it dry and on my clothing or anywhere else, it will reactivate. So you want to wait until it gets pretty dry after you put it on your piece before you sand it or go to town on painting it. The other thing is that you don't want to use your brushes, and using a tool that is non-porous, like a metal tool, can be helpful in both applying and keeping it from damaging your tools. So if your edges don't look perfect or aren't perfect, you can take a little bit of joint compound and fill those edges. Now, these are some very small examples because a cube is not overall a super complicated piece. But if you're working on a very complicated piece, like our project for class, what can happen is that you just have gaps that occur. So whether it is something that you didn't quite glue correctly and it's a little off, you can fix that with joint compound. You can trim that. You can do whatever you like. But this is, before you paint it, an opportunity both to fix that. Mix a little bit more. Mix a little bit more water in there so that it flows a little better. This is an opportunity to fix this before you paint it. And then once you paint it, it'll cover over a lot of those mistakes as well. You want to make sure you don't, right here, I want the difference between these two planes. I want the edge of the molding to look like the edge of the molding and not actually even those surfaces out. So I want to just be careful that I'm evening out what I want to even out and not erasing some of the work that I did. So this little piece up front here and is another one I'm going to fix. And keeping in mind that when we made these pillars, or when I made these pillars, I knew I would have some of these seams, and some of them are small enough that our liquid acrylic has some body to it and may fill that surface, may fill that crack just a little bit. But I'm going to fill that with joint compound, let this dry, and then use the emery board to sand it gently. So I think that looks like some of our big pieces. I can do this corner as well, which I am going to go ahead and do. So I'll just grab a little bit of this as well. And this time you can see that as I scrape across that surface, it's really pulling most of it off the physical flat part of the wall and just leaving it inside inside the crack that I'm trying to fill, inside the joint I'm trying to fill. I can also use my finger. Again, it is water soluble, so it'll come off my hands quite easily. And it's mostly chalk, and although it's white, it's not very opaque. As you can see, I'm not able to cover the brown until you can't see brown anymore. It doesn't serve as a base coat, but it can prime and prevent the surface underneath from absorbing paint. So that leads me to the next thing. If your item isn't white already, or like this is multiple colors, you're probably going to want to make it one color before you try and paint it. Now, this isn't necessary in all cases. For example, these toothpicks are all going to take paint a little bit differently than the rest of my model. And if I don't like that, then I want to prime them. I don't mind that in this case. So it doesn't matter to me. But if I want to prime, let's say if I want to paint these little beads, they're plastic. And I need to prime them with something that will stick to it so that my paint will stick to it. Acrylic will come right off plastic. So I would want to go ahead and prime that with something else. These stairs over here are intentionally don't meet, so I'm not going to do anything to patch that gap, but I am going to patch the little gaps in the front of these stairs right here, just in case. And when I apply it, I want to be gentle. I don't want to slap on a bunch of excess I don't need. And if I do, I want to scrape it as smooth as I can so that there's not as much sanding for me to do later. I got a little chunk of something in there. But the more scraping and careful application I do now, the easier it will be later to not have to keep sanding or filing for a long period of time. Generally with priming, I'll either take a color that I think will make a good undercolor or base color. So if I know my entire model piece is going to be a very warm, happy wood color, I might prime with a cream color. Or if I know that I'm going to be using something cool, I might prime with a cool gray. Any way that you slice it, I'm gonna try and look and see if I can get something similar to the final color that I have so that I get at least one step out of the way before continuing. If you apply it nice and thin, it will be close to sanding very quickly. And the other place I will say that is very good for applying this is right in the joint of this molding piece here. So I can press into that mold, and I want to make sure when I do that I don't lose the step quality of the molding itself. I don't want to lose this detail that I put into it when I made it. I just want to get this edge to look intentional. So this corner right here is really nice and flush and complete looking right here. But this one has a little bit of a gap to it, so I'm just going to come in and put a little bit of joint compound right in there and smush it in with my finger so that when I paint that, that'll look absolutely seamless. Okay. And that is pretty much prepped. I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to sand it, and then I'm going to go ahead and prime this piece white, but I don't need to prime this one white before we get going. So if you do need to prime your surface, I usually get prepared with a good amount of white and use a larger brush. And you want to get a nice smooth surface with your primer, but it's not going to be the finished look of your piece. So you just want to make sure it is thin enough that it does not leave texture. And if it's going to leave texture, I like to try and mix a little water in. This is a little thick. It's supposed to be a little thick, but it's nice opaque white paint. If it's going to leave a little bit of texture, I want it to leave an overall texture and not a brushy texture in one direction or another. So I'm going to do what's called a scumble and move my brush in an X and Y direction. So like this. I want to move it in both directions, like in little X patterns. Sometimes I use Y patterns so that I can move an X and a Y, so that I can move farther faster. That's what I think about it as. But you want to get the paint nice and thinly applied, and this needs to get everywhere. And the reason that is that it's going to close off the pores of this porous material and let it stay as a nice, clean, flat surface to paint on. So you not only want to try and not have any holidays or missed spots, as we call them. The painter went on holiday, went on vacation. You want to try and not to have any missed spots, but you also want to try and make sure you cover each and every bit of it so that you're absorbing into the paper, the cardboard, the wood, any different materials that you used, and that will allow them all to be the same surface. So they'll take paint in the same way. And this is true the same for the joint compound. The joint compound will take paint and reactivate in a different way than any other surface will. So even if they are the same color, they might react differently if they don't have a prime of the same material. Now, in some models, this matters a lot less than in others. And this is a good example here of how you could paint this before you assemble it. Painting this staircase is going to be a little bit difficult now that it's already assembled. And you would think that I might need a smaller brush to get into these cracks just to base it. But I encourage you to take advantage of your bigger brushes, especially while priming, especially while laying down big swaths of color. But just in general, your big brushes have a lot of flexibility. Even when you're painting small areas, you can get a large amount of painting done in a short amount of time. And because the bristles are flexible, you can get them into those tiny spaces. That does mean that you have to make sure that your gluing for these items are quite secure. I can't shove my brush in here and put that much pressure against these model pieces if I'm not confident in how much glue and how set that glue is. So it's nice to give your model just a little bit of time before you go at it and paint it. But I'm going to go ahead and finish priming this. And you want to, even though these white pieces are already white, you want to hit them again. You want to get them covered so that they're all the same plastic surface of acrylic paint when you go to complete this model painting. Okay. And here we go. All right, so even though this cube is all the same color, so it doesn't necessarily need to be primed or based in the sense that we need to make sure that the color we're starting from is the same on each side, or tone it to what we want for our project. It is just exposed porous material. And on the two sides we put joint compound on, that porous material is water soluble, where it is not water soluble on other sides. So this we could prime. I don't usually prime just crescent board projects. I think that they're fine to just paint straight on. And chipboard, because it is a little bit more porous and it is brown, I like to base that first, or prime that first. So we've done all of our prep work and our piece is ready to go, and that is where we would begin painting different textures. Okay, so once I went ahead and painted these out, some of the things that I learned is that our phthalo blue is going to give us this rich kind of greenier, aqua feeling green, no matter which one we use. But if we use lemon yellow, we get a lot more bluish aqua color than if we use the deep yellow, which we get a truer green with. Our ultramarine gives us a kind of washed out, very army green color. So depending on which one we're gonna wanna get, we would use a different green to achieve that. The purple, what I learned here is that we're gonna get a very pinkish color from the ultramarine and a very deep dark color from the phthalo blue. So if I want to use this information later, one of the things I could look at is that I can also look at trying to create some other colors in here that'll help me out. So I just got some phthalo blue all over my finger. So I'm gonna go wash that off in a second, but I'm gonna grab this phthalo blue. And then what I want to do is get something opposite of this, something very orange. So I'm going to use the deep yellow, and that gives me a big green, a very greenish color. And then I'm going to throw some red in there, and I'm going to mix these together until I get something very purple. What I'm looking for is a brown or a black analog. So this is going to give me, so this is deep yellow and crimson and phthalo blue. So that's this combination of colors will give me this kind of brown right here. So I can get a pretty dark color there. And along those same lines, if I add a little bit more crimson red to it, I'm gonna get something that's a little bit more deep red, but not necessarily something brown. If I add more yellow to it, I'm gonna get something very army green, very yellowish brown, so very burnt sienna, or raw sienna, not burnt sienna. But that way I can get that color. And basically filling in the rest of this, I just kind of want to play with colors and see what other things I can get, or what other things I might be trying to get. That just dumped a bunch of phthalo blue off my brush and into this arrangement. But that is also a helpful green color to help me understand what kind of color I would get if I use a lot more of that deep yellow. But I'm gonna go ahead and clean off my brushes and play a little bit more, but I think I'm about ready to move into my project, just because I now know a little bit more of what I want to get my colors. I'm gonna clean off my palette, refresh my colors, and refresh my brushes.